Chapter 16, Feudal and Late Medieval Europe. Section 1, Feudalism in Medieval Europe. Alright, so we're going to talk about this new time period after the ancient times called the Middle Ages, otherwise known as the medieval times, otherwise known as the Dark Ages. Regardless of the term, the Middle Ages are about a 1,000-year period after the fall of Rome. What you will see will be that the middle class, the educated middle class, will disappear. And most of the achievements of the Greeks and Romans will be kind of forgotten by people. Most people became farmers because trade decreased greatly. So basically you just grew food for yourself. And the most important thing was not learning. So that's different than the ancient times where learning was important. During this period of time, surviving was the most important. So surviving was more important than learning. The Christian church survived the fall of Rome thanks to the Germanic rulers who converted to Christianity, as well as converting the subjects within their empires. For example, Clovis, he was a Frank. He converted himself as well as his Frankish kingdom to Christianity. In 768, a guy named Charlemagne will become the new ruler of the Franks, and he will build a very large empire that covered much of Western Europe. So we're seeing the beginnings of something called the Holy Roman Empire. He established new laws and reformed the church by educating priests, organized authority within the church, and making alliances with popes. So he had a very close relationship with the popes. After Charlemagne's death, his kingdom was split into 3 parts by his grandsons. By doing so, it weakened the empire. And that will lead to disorder in Europe. And there'll be constant conflicts, constant wars taking place in Europe because of this collapse of this empire. Outside groups called the Vikings will sail down from an area called Scandinavia and invade and attack many places in Europe, making people fearful of coming out. Another group called the Magyars, who are from an area known as Hungary over in the east, did the same thing. So these people are instilling fear in a lot of the local peoples, so much so that they're too afraid to come out of their homes. Fearing for their lives, people looked for protection. This led to the creation of a new political system called feudalism. Feudalism deals with loyalty and protection. So under feudalism, you have a powerful noble who has land, and then that noble, who is called a lord, will give some land to a lesser noble called a vassal. This land that they give up is called a fief. So they give the fief to a lesser noble called a vassal, and in return for that land, the vassal then must give military service and work in the lord's court. So you can see in this diagram right here the social structure under feudalism. At the top you have the king, so he rules the kingdom. But then you have landowners who own land within that kingdom, wealthy landowners, these nobles right here, who have land, and they're going to give it to the vassals. That's the fief, giving the land to the fiefs. And the vassals then serve in the military as knights. And then below them are the peasants who do the everyday work for the nobles. The manor system was important under this feudal system because Europe, which was a collection of kingdoms and lands held by high-ranking nobles, part of that land was called a manor. The manor was the main part of a noble's land, with the great house, which is oftentimes a castle or some fortified structure, and then you have farmland around it. So if we're looking at this diagram, this whole thing is the manor. But inside you have the castle or the great house with the walls around it. Then you have the village on the outside or the farmland. If any attack would happen, anyone outside can enter the castle to be protected. serfs, which were peasants, worked the land and were considered part of the property. So if this land that the noble had would ever be sold or taken over by someone else, the people, the serfs who worked the land, are part of that property. They go along to the next owner of the land. A manor was self-sufficient, meaning it supplied the residents of that manor with everything they would need. So they didn't have to go outside the manor grounds. They could be safe and well inside the walls of the manor. Knights were professional warriors, and they are the vassals in this whole system. They are the lesser nobles, if you will. They were expected to live by a code of conduct called chivalry. Now, we kind of talked about this in Japan when the Japanese warriors had to follow something called bushido. This is the same idea, chivalry. They were to demonstrate strong faith. They would protect women and the weak, fight for injustice, or fight against injustice, and show courage in battle. Some knights formed military religious organizations to show devotion to the church, like Poor Knights of Christ and the Knights Templar. So these were military organizations that were religious as well. The Knights Templar swore an oath of poverty and obedience to the church and fought the enemies of the church. You will start to see, and we'll talk more about this in a future section, the end of feudalism with the growth of towns. So about 1,000 years later, around 1,000, towns are starting to perk back up again because people were feeling safe. They felt they could leave the manor and go to larger towns in Europe. People with the same occupation in these towns formed kind of a labor union, if you will, called guilds, which made rules that controlled quantity and quality of production, as well as keeping an eye out for their members. So, for example, in this picture here, you see metal workers. They could be part of a metalworking guild to protect each other. That is the end of section 1.